My people, something remarkable has just happened. For years, many across Africa have complained that our leaders bow too quickly in the face of Western pressure. Critics say we become too dependent, too soft, too willing to accept lectures from men in Washington or Brussels. But this week, Ghana's foreign minister broke that mold. When the chairman of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee publicly told Ghana to pay its debts before seeking trips to America, many expected silence, maybe even an apology. Instead, what came next shocked the world. The minister's response was firm, unapologetic, and to some, unforgettable. Supporters say this is exactly the kind of courage Kwame Nkrumah once spoke about. The courage to stand tall, the courage to remind the West that Africa is not a child waiting for instructions. They say this moment proves that Ghana, and Africa by extension, still has leaders with pride in their voice and fire in their chest. Critics, however, argue that words alone are not enough. They remind us that Ghana still struggles with debt, still leans on loans, and still has embassies abroad that fail to serve their own citizens. To them, a strong statement is inspiring, yes, but it must be matched with strong action at home. But whether you see it as bold defiance or mere rhetoric, one thing is certain. This exchange wasn't just about money. No, my people. It was about history, dignity, and sovereignty. The history of chains and unpaid reparations, the dignity of refusing to bow to another man's instructions, and the sovereignty of a nation reminding the world, we will not be told how to run our affairs. So stay with me, because after you hear the full story, you will not look at Ghana or Africa the same way again. On Tuesday, according to reports from that period, U.S. Senator Jim Risch, the top Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, took to Twitter to criticize Ghana's foreign minister. In his post, Senator Risch wrote, "Instead of a trip to D.C., Ghana's foreign minister should focus on honoring his government's commitments to repay U.S. companies and American taxpayers. We cannot continue subsidizing Ghana while it continues paying far larger debts to China." In simple terms, my people, the senator was saying, don't waste time visiting America if you haven't paid what you owe us. He accused Ghana of being more willing to pay its debts to China while leaving U.S. companies and taxpayers behind. This public statement was not just casual talk. It was a direct warning. And to many observers, it felt like an attempt to embarrass Ghana on the international stage. But then Ghana's foreign minister responded sharply. And that's the part that got the world talking. But Ghana's foreign minister didn't take that lightly. He clapped back with words that shook the room. He said, and listen carefully, this is very rich coming from someone who refuses to demand reparations from the U.S. for its despicable role in slavery. You will not dictate to a sovereign country how we conduct our foreign policy. Now let's break this down, my people. According to official records, Ghana's bilateral debt to the United States and other creditors stood at around $5.17 billion as of December 2022. On paper, that number might look huge. Billions always sound scary, and critics say this is proof that Ghana is living beyond its means, piling up loans that future generations will struggle to repay. But here's the catch. Supporters of the foreign minister argue that this amount, in the grand scheme of history, is measly. Why? Because what is $5 billion compared to centuries of unpaid reparations for slavery? What is $5 billion compared to the gold, the cocoa, the timber, the human lives stolen and shipped away during colonialism? Think about it, my people. For over 250 years, African slaves built the foundations of America's wealth for free. No wages, no pensions, no compensation. Until today, not a single cent has been paid back. So when the minister calls $5 billion chicken change, he is reminding the world that our losses are measured in trillions, not billions. Supporters say that is why Ghana must never bow its head in shame over these so-called debts. But critics warn that bold words cannot replace economic discipline. They argue that while history cannot be erased, today's loans are real, and defaulting on them damages Ghana's credibility in the global financial market. So the debate remains, is $5 billion a heavy burden or just pocket change compared to what the world owes Africa? And here's where it gets deeper. This isn't just any country talking back. This is Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah's Ghana, the first African nation to win independence, the same Ghana that inspired freedom movements across the continent. So when Ghana speaks up, it echoes the same fire that once defeated colonialism and imperialism. But let's get real, my people. Why should Ghana, or any African country, even be borrowing money in the first place? We are sitting on mountains of gold. We have oil, cocoa, bauxite, timber, the kind of wealth that most countries in the West can only dream about. Supporters of the foreign minister say this is exactly the point. Africa is rich, yet treated like it is poor. And until we manage our resources properly, we will always look like beggars in a palace built on treasure. Do you realize that just one fully owned gold mine could generate billions for Ghana every single year? Yet somehow, instead of using that wealth, we are still knocking on the doors of the IMF and foreign banks, begging for loans. Look at the Middle East, my people. They have only one major resource: oil. Yet see how powerful, respected, and feared they are globally. Africa, on the other hand, has oil, gas, gold, diamonds, fertile land, endless sunlight, and more. Supporters say we are 1,000 times richer than the Middle East on paper, and yet we are treated like we have nothing. Why? Critics argue it comes down to one thing: mismanagement. For decades, corrupt leaders, poor planning, and bad deals with foreign companies have left us rich on paper, but poor in reality. Our resources are exported raw, sold cheaply, and processed abroad, only for us to buy them back at higher prices. So the real question is this: with all this wealth, how long will Africa keep running to the West for loans? And how long will we let outsiders dictate the value of our own treasures? Here's the truth, my people. Africa does not need handouts. Supporters of this view say we don't need to keep crawling back to the IMF or the World Bank like children begging for pocket money. These institutions have kept Africa in a cycle of dependency for decades. Loans today, conditions tomorrow, and poverty forever. What we truly need is self-reliance. Imagine this: refineries on our own soil turning crude oil into fuel, factories in our towns processing cocoa into finished chocolate instead of exporting beans for pennies, steel plants forging the backbone of our infrastructure, textile mills clothing our people in African-made fabrics, and yes, tech industries led by young Africans shaping the future of digital innovation. Supporters argue that until we build these industries, until we take control of production, Africa will always remain at the mercy of outsiders who dictate the price of our raw materials and sell us back finished goods at 10 times the cost. Critics, however, point out that building such industries requires discipline, unity, and leadership that Africa has often lacked. They say corruption, political instability, and poor planning have crippled many of these dreams before. For them, the challenge is not the idea of self-reliance. It's whether we have the will to make it real. But one thing is certain, my people. Until Africa produces for itself, we will always be consumers of other people's wealth and never the true owners of our own destiny. And this is important, my people. We cannot just clap for the minister and stop there. Words are powerful, yes, but real change begins at home. Take our embassies in Europe, for example. Supporters of reform have been crying out for years. They say our embassies are dysfunctional, unprofessional, and in some cases, even hostile to their own citizens. Ghanaians abroad are forced to wait months for simple visa appointments, spoken to with disrespect, and treated like strangers in the house of their own nation. Meanwhile, critics point out the bitter irony. Europeans can walk into those same embassies and walk out with visas in minutes. And then there's the issue of Ghanaian passports. Foreigners are walking around with them like it's a free-for-all. Some even use them for criminal enterprises across Europe. Supporters of accountability say this damages our reputation, undermines trust, and paints every Ghanaian abroad with suspicion. Critics argue that until we fix these internal failures, until our embassies serve Ghanaians first, until our passports are guarded like treasures, until our systems work for our people, we cannot demand respect abroad, because the world sees us not only by how we speak, but by how we treat our own. My people, let's be honest. We cannot fight for dignity on the international stage if we allow indignity at home. Respect is not given, it is earned. And before we demand it from others, we must show it to ourselves. Still, this moment was powerful. For once, Ghana stood tall. For once, Africa reminded the West that we are not children begging for approval. This is the Ghana of Kwame Nkrumah, the Ghana that can once again inspire a continental awakening. Because the truth is simple: no senator, no IMF, no World Bank will save us. Only we can save ourselves. If this shook you, share this video. Let the world know Africa is rising. And don't forget to subscribe for more bold truths like this.